Okay, welcome everyone. If you're just joining, you either should have already seen and answered, or you should see right now a poll on your screen. Please take a minute to answer those few questions, and we will get started. My name is Kim Warner. I am the VP of Business Development for Sentio Solutions. I am very happy to be sitting here with you today and sponsoring this remote patient monitoring webinar. This webinar is sponsored by Sentio Solutions, FEEL, as well as Valencell. And so today our intention is to gain insight from one of the major sensor manufacturers, Valencell, on the advances in remote sensing. We'll also be joined by Dr. Richard Popiel, who is an industry expert and senior executive leader in healthcare. He's also the founder and managing partner of Exploration Health. And we're also joined by the founder of Sentio Solutions, George Eleftherio. So actually, Ryan, let's start with you as the expert in wearables and sensing technology. Can you give us an overview of what's driving wearable technologies and yes, you can. There you go. I'll give you a minute to share your screen. Yeah, if you could just kind of walk us through what's driving the wearables in the market today.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So just really brief background on Valencell. We make the biometric sensor technology that goes into wearable devices of all kinds. So everything from smartwatches and fitness bands, audio earbuds, hearing aids, and increasingly more health and medical devices. And that really is the kind of the starting point for the discussion around what is going on in the wearables market today overall. And if you've seen any of the recent announcements, both on the consumer side of things and on the health and medical device side of things, there's a convergence going on at a macro level of these two segments of the market, if you will, as the consumer wearables companies move towards becoming more personal health devices at a minimum, if not outright medical devices in some cases. And that certainly caught the attention of the health and medical device sector, which that's a pretty broad umbrella for a wide variety of different companies in that sector, from traditional med device companies, but also pharma companies and insurance companies and corporate wellness organizations, hearing aid manufacturers. There's a pretty broad spectrum of different companies that fit into that category, but all moving towards becoming these personal health devices and medical devices intended to be used outside of a medical facility. And so they're all converging towards that one end of helping people understand how their body is responding to their day-to-day activities, whether that's running a marathon or sitting on the couch or managing a disease or whatever it might be. You're seeing more and more capabilities from devices from a pretty broad range of companies that fit into, in many cases, broader solutions in the digital therapeutics area and patient workflows of all kinds. So what is, we get asked this quite a bit of what's possible with wearable devices today. And so I'll highlight just a few of particularly the health and medical use cases that wearables are being used for today. And then also we'll talk a little bit more about, as we go along here, what the future holds. But these are just some of the examples in terms of remote patient monitoring, certainly in the context of the pandemic environment that we're in today. That has gotten a lot more attention, and we're starting to see a lot more projects and solutions come to the fore in that category. Certainly stress management is also an area of great interest in these times, but also in outside of pandemic environments as well. Hypertension management is a huge area, given that there's close to 1 billion people around the world with some form of high blood pressure or hypertension. Biofeedback around pain management is another area where we're seeing a lot of interest. And so we'll talk in more detail about some of these other areas. These are just a few of the examples. And when you talk about what's possible with wearable devices today, it's really important to, and we encourage all of our customers being the device makers or the solution providers that happen to use a wearable device as part of that broader solution, to really start with the end in mind. So starting over here in the area around what is the condition you're trying to manage, what is the problem you're trying to solve, what's the outcome you're looking to drive, and work backwards from there to figure out the different solution components that will enable that user experience or enable that problem solving. And so in the context of wearable devices and digital therapeutics more broadly, that means depending on what you're trying to solve or the outcome you're trying to deliver, you may need certain assessments that are driven by sensor solutions of all kinds. And those assessments then feed into that user experience to tell an individual how their body is responding to what they're doing at the time, or more longitudinally over time. And then, of course, there's directly measured metrics that come off of wearable devices and other sensor technologies that feed into those assessments, which then feed that user experience. And then from there, of course, once you understand the metrics that need to be measured, then you can understand how to choose the right sensor technology that will measure those metrics to feed those assessments and generate that user or that patient experience. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that overlaid on top of all of this today is at a minimum some level of data science capabilities and more specifically machine learning techniques in not just the raw sensor data that's coming off of the sensor technology, but also all the way through to the user experience and providing that context and those deeper insights that a human may not be able to identify or may not think about identifying in advance of some of those insights being surfaced by machine learning techniques and algorithms associated with data science capabilities. And one of my favorite examples of this is a company called Livecore, and we have no affiliation with Livecore. I love this example of, for those of you who don't know, they make an ECG, a portable ECG reader that you see there called the Cardia. And they worked with the Mayo Clinic on a non-invasive estimation of potassium levels using their ECG technology, specifically looking for hyperkalemia or elevated levels of potassium in the blood that can cause life-threatening heart rhythm changes, arrhythmias, and weakness, and even sometimes temporary paralysis. And so working with Mayo, they got a training data set for their machine learning algorithms of more than 1 million 12-lead ECGs that Mayo had collected over the years. And actually that number ended up going to nearly 3 million data sets. And what they were looking for in their first algorithmic attempt was, in their words, was a bust, because their assumption that algorithm was based on was that the T wave or the T wave portion of the ECG, it was the correlation to potassium levels, and they didn't see a strong correlation there at all. So they pivoted to analyzing the entire ECG wave. And in doing that, using a machine learning algorithm, the error rate dropped to around 1%, and the ROC curve rose from 0.63 to 0.86, which was good enough for them for the FDA to designate this a breakthrough device and fast tracked for FDA clearance. So a great example of the combination of biometric sensor technology and machine learning techniques to identify elements of that sensor data that wouldn't otherwise have been found, which highlights a few points. One is you need massive amounts of data to feed these machine learning techniques properly, but also not just any data, labeled data. In this case, they had the ECG readings in combination with blood potassium levels, and those labeled data sets are critical for these machine learning algorithms, of course. The other thing that this really highlights for me is that humans don't always know the best place to look, or what we're looking for, or what we will find when we look there. So the combination of human insights and human knowledge combined with machine learning applied to biometric sensor technology from wearable devices and from other devices as well is the wave of the future, if you will, and is already, as this demonstrates, showing strong power to be able to help patients going forward, whether they're in a hospital or healthcare facility or at home.
Thank you, Ryan, for that example. That is a very interesting example. And the question begs to be answered. You know, I imagine there's continuous drive to make these sensors smaller, faster, less intrusive. What are you seeing? What's the near term look like for these types of wearable sensors as this industry grows?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. All of our customers, the device makers, want these sensors smaller, faster, cheaper, and still yet more capable. So we certainly work on each one of those elements of the sensor technology, but what you're going to continue to see more of is the existing sensor capability or sensor technologies being able to do new and different things, particularly as it relates to PPG sensors. Obviously, we're biased because we make PPG sensors, but we see a long road of possibilities and additional insights and biometrics that can be generated from a PPG sensor. There's also the element of sensor fusion, so not just using one sensor modality, but using, as an example, PPG in combination with ECG sensor technology or others to be able to unlock new capabilities and new use cases within these devices. The Apple Watch is a good example of a combination of PPG and ECG, where the PPG sensor identifies an irregular heart pattern and encourages the individual to take an ECG reading. And then lastly is, as I mentioned, the overlay of, or the application of data science capabilities and machine learning techniques to this data, and not just the sensor data itself, but at a population level, looking at individual insights and how that applies at a population level.
Interesting. Okay. We all look forward to the advances in this space. So I want to move my next question over to George. So George, you created this company, Sentio Solutions, with the Feel brand, knowing that remote patient care was important. In fact, virtual care was an important tenet of your model prior to COVID. Now here we are in the midst of this pandemic. Tell me a little bit about why virtual care was important to you in this model, even before COVID, and why now is it even that much more important today?
I think, Kim, that all entrepreneurs start because of a personal problem, because of they're trying to solve an issue that is challenging in their lives, and there is no solution out there available. So I think that when we started together with Harry Chirpa, this company, we both had our own share of personal challenges with mental health. And the common pattern was that we couldn't receive any support outside of the psychotherapist office. So I personally was experiencing panic attacks during my times in a very large management consulting firm. And I had to wait for my next appointment with my psychotherapist to discuss this further. And the next appointment could be days or weeks away. And I was fortunate enough to have access to a psychotherapist. Most Americans and people globally do not have that privilege, and they have to wait for 4 months in the US and in Germany, as we see, to see their psychotherapist for their first time. So the real need that I was experiencing was support in my real life 24/7. And I think that definitely the expertise of my co-founder, Harry, who was using sensors like the ones that Ryan mentioned and some others as part of his PhD in biomedical engineering in order to detect emotions, was what made us both very interested in starting this company. So I think that the need for support outside of the clinician's office is evident in the field of mental health and has been for years now. And we have come across many more people challenged by similar issues that they have been sharing those stories. Now, when it comes to COVID-19, I think the rest of the world came to realize that the need for remote care, not only in the field of mental health, but for other medical areas as well, is extremely important for obvious reasons. But definitely we are very big proponents of that for a variety of years.
Thank you, George. Richard, I think you bring a unique perspective to this. George just talked about kind of the episodic care. Can you tell us a little bit more about, what historically care for a patient looked like, how the episodic care plan was, and how that's changing? We all know that's changing, but would love you to weigh in on the transformation of care.
Sure. And first, I can't, as a physician, I can't hold myself back from commenting on the tracing that Ryan showed in his conversation about hyperkalemia. So that tracing, which is repetitive, in clinical terms, that tracing is called PQRST. Those are the different blips along the way. And hyperkalemia extends the QT interval, and when that interval is extended, it puts an individual at risk for ventricular fibrillation, which is deadly. And just to bring that back to COVID for a sec, that's what was the problem with hydroxychloroquine. You had to use, it was thought before it was shown to be ineffective, you had to use higher doses of it, and it extended that QT interval. So just as an aside. So yeah, thank you. And yeah, I have been a senior executive at health plans since the mid-1990s. I retired from corporate life. I didn't retire at the end of 18, where I was at Cambia Health Solutions, which is a Blues plan in 4 states. I was the executive vice president and chief medical officer. But really, it's my medical training and how care used to be delivered that's most important. Typically, you had a personal physician, and for most of us, we saw that physician periodically for a routine checkup or for episodic illness. Sometimes we developed chronic conditions, but regardless, our physician developed a treatment plan, and we were off on our own, our individual journeys to execute against that plan. And at some point in the future, we returned to the physician's office. I mean, it sometimes was a long time, per George's comment. And the physician evaluated either the success or failure of that plan. And if it did not achieve the targeted outcome, then the physician tried to determine the root cause and fix it. This, in my view, characterizes episodic care. Fast forward to the present. With huge tailwinds driven by COVID-19, we are seeing a surge in remote monitoring such that our physicians and staff can monitor in real time the status of our conditions. This has been one of the more significant challenges in the way traditional medicine has been practiced because of the episodic, as I just described, the episodic nature of care and the status of a patient's condition based on office visits with no information in between those office visits. With the launch of Apple's iPhone, and it was 13 years ago, 2007, and competing technologies like the Android and others, we saw the emergence of an enormous number of applications for a variety of healthcare conditions. And last time I checked, I think there were like, Ryan, correct me on this one, I think there were over 1 million applications for health, fitness, nutrition, and well-being. So that's a little bit broader than just health care. But there was a subset of these, like around 300,000, that are true mobile health applications. And these applications generally work with smartphones, patient monitoring devices, personal digital assistants, wearables, as Ryan had mentioned, and other devices. And because of COVID-19, both doctors and patients are getting more comfortable with these interactions. Excuse me. And who would have thought 5 years ago that telepsychiatry would be relevant? But today it is. And we are collecting substantial evidence because of the need to have these virtual or mobile or digital interactions, substantial evidence to support the effectiveness of the interactions and the outcomes that are so crucial.
Well, thank you for that, George. I'm sorry. Thank you for that, Richard. I think we talked about sensors and remote patient care in general. I'd love to focus a little bit on mental health care for a minute. So I know, George, that one of the driving factors in creating this company was the lack of objective data for mental health. So could you tell us a little bit more about the driving factors, and perhaps you can share an example of how objective measurement translates to outcomes?
Absolutely, absolutely, Kim. And if you don't mind, I will share a few slides just so we have a little bit of a visual in our hands. Basically, just to provide a little bit of a background about what we do, our mission as a company is to bring objective data into the field of mental health, and we're doing this by discovering and integrating into therapeutic protocols biomarkers and developing digital therapeutics for mental health. Exactly as you said, Kim, in contrast to any other medical field, mental health lacks objective indicators. When someone is suffering from diabetes, they monitor their glucose levels multiple times a day or even continuously. When someone is suffering from heart disease, they monitor their blood pressure. But when it comes to depression or anxiety or other mental disorders, we really still rely on self-reported questionnaires. The physician or the clinician or the psychotherapist and of course the psychiatrist play a critical role into that path. This is exactly the gap that we're trying to bridge with our solution. And in our programs, we're using sensors that monitor the response of the autonomic nervous system of individuals, and through our proprietary algorithms are able to detect the emotional state of a person continuously and unobtrusively, and in a private way, I should add, in order to use those data points and provide real-time digital interventions through our mobile application. Then we are taking all that data back to licensed psychotherapists or mental health coaches that are using them in order to increase their clinical efficiency and effectiveness. As we say, we try to give superpowers to psychotherapists, and through those allow them to see many more individuals that request their support. Of course, we have an educational component as well as part of our program, which is very important in order to help individuals build long-lasting coping skills for their mental health. So in our program, we have a very real-life example of what Ryan was talking about before. Actually, Valencell is one of the sensors that we're using for our PPG measurements. And but what's even more interesting than developing a program that is innovative and is using cutting-edge technology is what we have seen in terms of engagement and outcomes from our users. So in our program, users receive real-time support through the mobile application, real-time support that is triggered based on the data that we collect through our device. And we saw that this real-time intervention is actually increasing engagement of users significantly. We see individuals in our program interacting with their application over 60 times per week. And more importantly, they perform over 12 mental health exercises per week. This is many more times than in traditional therapy or with other digital mental health solutions that do not have this real-time monitoring and advice component. Also, this leads to much lower dropout rates. We see in our program less than 20% dropout rates. Again, we believe that the main reason for this is because we are able to have this very close proximity to the user and engage them back into the program when the times are not easy and they lose their motivation to continue. And I would say that this is definitely something very interesting that we saw in our clinical and usability studies. But the second piece that makes our program different and that was really a big bet that we decided to take was reducing the time between the therapist and the participant in our program from 60 minutes to just 15. The reason why we did that is because we believe that in order to allow everyone to have access to mental health support, we need to give superpowers to the psychotherapists. So if we give them those superpowers, they would be able to see many more individuals and through that provide much more support to many more people. And what we saw in our clinical and usability studies was very interesting. We were expecting to see an improvement in depression and anxiety close to 40%. And in our programs, we saw improvement north of 60%, although we reduced the duration of each session from 60 minutes to just 15. And the reason for that is because people are taking action on their own. They own their own basically solution, and they can help themselves without the need of the therapist during their week. And then during their weekly session with the therapist, they have their support as well. So by improving self-management and providing the tools and the data to individuals, we see much greater improvement in terms of outcomes for their mental health. And of course, much greater life satisfaction as a result of that. So that was a few things that I wanted to add to what Ryan and Richard said in terms of how we could use those sensory technologies into the field of mental health, and how this could have a very interesting impact in the lives of individuals struggling with those conditions.
Yeah, thank you, George. You know, I personally have been very inspired by what you guys have created here. So it's very impressive. But it also begs kind of the next question I'd like to go back to Richard on is the technology is great. You know, I love the idea of the objective data empowering the user, you know, giving the therapist superpowers. But how do we pull this all together for a health plan in this continuous care plan for the actual patient?
Thank you for that question. And so telemedicine and remote monitoring have been around for a long time. They've been around since the 60s, but it really wasn't that effective for two reasons. One, the technology was not sophisticated enough. And two, there was a strong belief on behalf of both patients and doctors that patients had to be seen in their doctor's office. And one could argue, actually, that telemedicine happened before the 1960s. So kind of let me go over a typical day in the life of a primary care physician. They would get up, and hold your seats on this one. They would get up at 4 in the morning. They would see their patients who were admitted to the hospital. They would finish making rounds and they would go to the office. They would see their patients in the morning. They would break for lunch. They may or may not have lunch, but they would make phone calls to any patient who called in during the morning. This was, in essence, telehealth, because as Ryan knows, prior to COVID, most telehealth visits were by phone, not by video. Then they would see patients in the afternoon, and when they finished, they would make more calls to patients who called in the afternoon, again, telehealth. Then they would return to the hospital to see patients, and after all of that, they would go home, usually 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening. So even prior to COVID, telehealth companies were promoted as an alternative. So now we're talking more recently. They were promoted as an alternative to face-to-face care. And remote diagnostic companies were emerging to enrich the visit. But honestly and sadly, the uptake was insufficient. I know as a senior executive at my plan, and I don't have visibility into where they're at in the last year and a half, but we were compelled to add a telehealth provider to our portfolio, but the uptake of telehealth was less than double digits. So even though we engaged with them, the uptake wasn't large. And most of it, as I said before, was by phone rather than video. Fast forward to COVID-19, we have seen incredible tailwinds because doctors could not see their patients in the office. There was no elective care allowed face-to-face for a period of time. So they had to rely on telehealth. And if care was being delivered remotely, then treatment plans had to be monitored remotely. So we saw a significant uptake in remote monitoring technology, as Ryan described. Every health system was scrambling at the beginning to buy or build a telehealth solution So it wasn't just the big players, and I'm not going to mention names, but you know who they are. But we also saw an incredible increased use of existing technology or the development of new technology to assist in monitoring patients. So you had to do both. You had to have the face-to-face virtual visit, and you had to monitor their care. And the spectrum is huge. And Ryan mentioned it, but I'll just remind everyone, and I may not get all of it correctly, but scales for weight, blood pressure cuffs, glucometers, pulse, EKG and arrhythmia management, other types of heart management, sleep and apnea management, monitors to detect falls. You all remember the ads about I've fallen and I can't get up. Temperature checks, O2 saturation. This is part of Apple Watch's new iWatch. They're incorporating oxygen saturation, activity trackers, respiratory rates, digital stethoscopes, other medical alert devices, sensor-guided physical therapy. Who could have imagined that we could actually do physical therapy digitally? And yet there are companies that have emerged that teach people how to do physical therapy on their own. And then, of course, a challenge that we've been facing for a long time, which is medication adherence, and all the different digital Bluetooth-enabled technologies to try to get people to take their medication. And as I said, I'm sure I missed some categories. Most of these technologies now are Bluetooth-enabled. They can send information real-time to clinicians or staff that monitor or track the status of patients. This information is often stored in dashboards where clinicians can see the whole picture, the comprehensive picture. And to this end, there are some companies that are just aggregators. They don't do anything in terms of developing a sensor. They just aggregate all the information from various sensors and organize it into a comprehensive record. And if I didn't mention it before, there are also capabilities that are focused on face recognition. Just look at this attractive face. Some of you may have heard of geofencing, and that's to determine if somebody goes beyond their normal area of travel, which is a red flag, as well as tracking daily activities. And these, as Ryan had said, these applications are smart. They're driven by artificial intelligence and machine learning, and over time they allow for personalization. So in some cases, this information is also combined with EMR data to enhance what we know about a patient and their healthcare journey. Let me end by telling a story, a short story. I had dinner with an international expert physician in the digital health area about a year ago. And he told me this story about him developing abdominal pain. He took out his smartphone and performed an ultrasound and found that he had kidney stones. He then, because he had severe abdominal pain, went to the ER, but instead of accepting his smartphone finding, they conducted traditional testing to get the same results. This is the dilemma we face. So hopefully, with COVID-19, we are getting broader acceptance. And one more thing, and I'm sorry for not mentioning it previously, there were successes prior to COVID-19. One company was able to use a Bluetooth-enabled glucometer. They had created the glucometer to measure blood sugar real time, to evaluate results with algorithms real time, to intervene real time if the results were abnormal. And they were able to demonstrate that by managing a patient real time, not episodically, as we talked about before, they're able to achieve a statistically significant reduction in hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of long-term effectiveness of diabetes treatment. In behavioral health, there have been limited abilities to detect real-time changes in status. But George's company does just that. they have a medical device, as George mentioned, that can measure changes in emotion real time and intervene in real time. This is what attracted me to the company and is unique in the behavioral health field. And they have been able to demonstrate, as George had shown, significant improvements in key metrics.
Thank you, Richard, for that. Thank you for the story. Thank you for weighing in too on your opinion of what George is doing. And I had to go back to Ryan on this and say, you know, I mean, I know we that last session we talked a little bit mostly about Feel and Sentio solutions, but Ryan, we're not a customer. Who are your other customers, and how are you seeing them leverage sensors to you know, perform remote patient monitoring?
Yeah, it's a great question, in an area we're doing a lot of work in, and I think that's just reflective of the way the market is developing from more of a consumer focused market to being much more focused on personal health and medical outcomes. And much of the work, certainly the majority of the work we're doing is in areas around digital therapeutics, kind of at this convergence of personal health and medical devices. And Richard's story and that example is a great example of what we're seeing at more of a macro level, or a broader shift in this movement towards lower acuity but higher frequency monitoring. Away from the high acuity, low frequency, where you go see your doctor maybe once a year or maybe twice a year, towards that continuous monitoring, establishing a personal baseline, and then receiving care when there's a deviation from that baseline, or when there's a change in your personal condition that instigates some kind of care delivery. And so we're seeing that in a variety of different areas. Richard mentioned a bunch of them: sleep monitoring, respiratory conditions, clinical trials, particularly using wearables in generating digital endpoints in the context of clinical trials, sort of at the front of the therapeutics space, but then also using wearables in the context of already approved pharmacotherapies for understanding at an individual level how those individuals are responding to that particular pharmacotherapy, and doing real world evidence gathering once the pharmacotherapy is already established. A couple of other areas of tangential interests that I'll mention are one in the area around more industrial applications of this sensor. Customers who are doing using wearable devices in the context of a broader solution to do things like heat stress monitoring for field workers, construction workers, military and first responder personnel, those that require, well, one, they're in very dangerous situations, and two, real-time monitoring is critical to understand when at an individual level there's something wrong, and hopefully with enough advanced warning to be able to pull that person out of the field or get them care that they need before they're past the point of no return. And so we're seeing a lot of this, a lot of applications like this that you wouldn't necessarily think about as a wearable application, or let alone more of a digital therapeutic, but real-time monitoring in capturing real-time data when an individual is going about their daily activities, whether highly dangerous or fairly benign, and then feeding that data into a monitoring system that can provide alert thresholds and get that information in front of the people that need to see it, to be able to take action to avoid catastrophe.
Thank you, Ryan, for that sneak peek. It's a very interesting time to be where you're at. I wanted to, in the last kind of 15 minutes here, I wanted to turn the discussion to conversation around return on investment. But before I do that, I also wanted to mention, if you do have questions for us after this discussion on ROI, please go ahead and type your questions in there in the Q&A, and I'll field them once we wrap this up. So return on investment. So Richard, you've shared how the continuum of care is changing. Does this change how we look at ROI? I mean, can you tell us, more about ROI versus VOI, value on investment, and how do we measure success in this space?
So health plans traditionally have engaged vendors to help them solve a critical health problem. And often a plan determines that an area needs solution, and if they cannot build the solution, they rely on third parties like Sentio. And as you might imagine, there are many problems in a health plan that need to be solved, and the funds available are usually insufficient to meet all the requests for funding that come in each year. This is a perennial problem for health plans. This is, and I should add, this is after a plan trims that budget because of mandates, regulatory mandates, or because they need to upgrade their IT systems to stay in compliance. So there's precious little money left, and so they go through a process, which is fairly straightforward. A set of specific vendors for a specific problem will pitch to a plan, and then the staff will evaluate the solutions based on these pitches, find the best in breed, and then ultimately a financial analysis gets done, resulting in a return on investment, or ROI, as you mentioned. Based on the recommendation of the staff plus the financial analysis, a solution goes on a list, and the list is rank ordered, often on the ROI that gets delivered. So a solution ultimately can be above the line, which means it's likely to get funded, or below the line, which means it's unlikely to get funded unless there is a strong strategic reason for it to be moved up on the list. So that's ROI. VOI, or value on investment, is a little different and used more so in the wellness area. This is because it factors in dimensions that aren't ordinarily captured in ROI. Dimensions such as absenteeism, presenteeism, productivity when you're working, employee morale, which is related in some ways to productivity, and also is related to talent retention. So these are some factors, not all the factors, that are captured in a VOI calculation versus an ROI calculation. And I think they're especially important in behavioral health. And by the way, you can't just measure the behavioral health component of behavioral health. The results that George presented were fabulous, but you also have to measure in individuals who have comorbid physical illness the cost of these comorbidities, which sometimes can be multiples of the cost for these physical issues if they didn't have a comorbid health or behavioral health issue. So you have to look at it broadly. So VOI, which characterizes a set of dimensions that goes above just a financial measure or metric, and then all the things that I just mentioned around the relationship between behavioral health and physical health. And with respect to metrics, I think George already mentioned them. You have to engage people. If you don't engage people just at the outset, your solution is not going to work because nobody's going to be there to receive it. So you have to engage folks, and then you have to get them to become active users. which I think we already saw in George's presentation. And then, not to be repetitive, but reduction in anxiety, reduction in depression, life satisfaction, and other metrics like those become so much more important in this realm.
Thanks, Richard. George, do you have anything you want to add to that as far as how does FEEL rise to the occasion for bringing ROI and BOI to it's not only the patients but the clients who are paying for this? Oh.
So sorry, I was muted. Absolutely, Kim. I wanted to add, in addition to what Richard said, what we have seen, and there is significant research showing that individuals suffering from a mental health issue cost to the health system overall, and primarily to health plans, 3 to 4 times higher than individuals that do not suffer from a mental health issue. This could be, as Richard said very well, a comorbid behavioral health issue to an existing chronic condition in many cases, or not. And that's very important to keep in mind, because this gives to behavioral health companies an unfair advantage to provide this return on investment that is so much required from health plans. Also, there is significant improvement that we could do in terms of how we utilize the time of clinicians and psychotherapists and psychiatrists, and if we provide them with data, then they would need to spend much less time in their patient visits, and this would also bring additional return on investment. But finally, I would say that the key component of remote monitoring is the fact that it prevents emergency room visits, it prevents rehospitalizations. This proximity that remote patient monitoring in mental health and in other areas gives to patients and to their physicians, to their clinicians, is the fact that they can intervene before it's too late. They can intervene before individuals end up in the emergency room. It's no wonder why we see individuals suffering from behavioral health issues visiting the emergency room 6 times more than individuals that don't suffer from those conditions. And the reason for that is because they cannot get any support outside of the emergency room, outside of their psychotherapist office. So definitely, there's a great room for improvement when it comes to return on investment for those solutions. And I think that especially during COVID, this becomes even more obvious. It was quite interesting because during that time we went back to our data, and we tried to see what our data was telling us before and after COVID-19 happened. And it was quite interesting to see that actually the negative emotions that we were able to see through the data had doubled, and the whole emotional space actually had shifted towards a more negative side of the emotional spectrum. Which again is quite of a finding, and this could be used from healthcare providers or from mental health clinicians in order to support their patients, to understand the impact that the COVID itself could have to the lives of the patients that they manage. So I'm very optimistic about the future of how those technologies are going to be used in and out behavioral health. And I think that if there is anything good about COVID-19, I think it's the fact that it made us to take big steps forward in that area.
Thank you, George, for highlighting the statistics around mental health and the ROI there. We've just got a couple minutes left. Ryan, did you want to weigh in? Is there anything you'd like to add about demonstrating, ROI in wearable sensors?
So in the interest of time, I'll just add one quick thing, and I think it's pretty obvious that George and Kim and the whole team at Feel do a great job of this, but you can't say it enough how important it is to not just make claims, but back up those claims with real world evidence and the data to support those claims. Because I think it's fair to say in terms of at the clinician level, there's a, pardon the pun, there's a healthy skepticism of wearable technology and really digital therapeutics as a whole. So the more we can demonstrate the efficacy of these solutions and get these solutions into the hands of clinicians and more importantly, impact patient outcomes positively, the more of an impact we're going to have on public health as a whole.
Thank you, Ryan. We've got a couple questions coming in the Q&A tab. The first one is for Richard. First of all, thank you all for the input there. The first one's for Richard. The question is, prior to COVID, why was telehealth provider uptick low? What and who were the barriers, would you say, in your opinion?
So a couple of points on that. If you go back 10 years or so, when telehealth really became a thing, it was mostly focused on trying to create an alternative to face-to-face visit to control cost. It didn't have anything to do with the consumer, their journey, and trying to satisfy the consumer to provide care where they wanted it and when they wanted it. So I think the reasons initially for this kind of new wave, and I'm describing the last 10 years of telemedicine, weren't, in my view, the right reasons. If they had focused on the consumer journey and consumer satisfaction, there may have been more uptick. And you have to add on top of that the fact that people want to see their doctor. They want to see them face to face. At least historically, that's how they wanted to get care. And as much as you tried to push a telehealth solution, if that was being pushed on people who didn't want it, they weren't going to use it. So those are probably the two basic reasons. And I would also say the first ATM machine, I think, Ryan probably knows this, was launched in Atlanta in 1977. Everybody wanted to feel money and exchange money face to face. They didn't want to have to deal with a machine. And it took a long time for people to get comfortable with ATM and for ATMs to be interchangeable based on whatever banking institution you had. Interoperability, we use that term a lot in healthcare. So I think we're still on that road. We're trying to get interoperable. We're being forced into telehealth. People are now getting comfortable speaking to their doctors or clinicians remotely versus face-to-face. And I think that's going to change. That's going to be the new normal. That's going to change everything going forward.
Thank you very much for that. I'm being sensitive to the time. We've got about a minute to the top of the hour, and I know we all have busy schedules. I want to thank the three of you for joining us today and sharing your knowledge. Everyone on the attendee list, I think there have been some questions about receiving this recording. You will receive this recording tomorrow in an email. There were some questions that we did not get to because of time, so please feel free to reach out to the coordinators, our marketing team at Feel, and we can get your questions answered. Any parting comments from any of the three panelists? Go ahead, George.
I would say nothing to add here. Just wanted to thank Richard and Ryan for joining us in this webinar, and just say again that I feel just the fact that we're having this webinar is making me optimistic about the future of digital health and what we can bring to the market to support many more individuals.
It's great
Thanks.
discussion. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate everyone taking time out of your busy schedules.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, marketing team from Feel, for putting this together.